On the 10th of November 2019, Evo Morales, the democratically elected president of Bolivia, was forced to resign by the police and the armed forces. Since then, an unpopular racist has been installed as interim president of the country, and pro-democracy demonstrators have been massacred. Now supposedly they are going to have new elections. Well, anyone with half a brain can see that these new elections will be a sham. There is no way the military will allow a person who would punish them for their human rights abuses and their treason to be elected. Democracy is dead in Bolivia, murdered by the armed forces, the Organization of American States, and the right-wing minority that now rule the country. Now to me, this coup came as a surprise since Bolivia was doing so well under the presidency of Evo Morales and his movement for Socialism Party. GDP almost quadrupled, poverty had decreased from 59% to 35%, extreme poverty had been cut by more than half, and inequality had been reduced, showing that the economic benefits of this growth were flowing to the poor and the working class. Furthermore, Morales attempted to empower the indigenous people of Bolivia, who were previously neglected and ignored. His 2009 constitution recognized the indigenous multicolored flag as a national flag alongside the Bolivian tricolor, and 36 indigenous languages were declared to be the official languages of Bolivia alongside Spanish. Now, in terms of economic policy, the Morales government was not that radical, nor could it be. Thanks to neoliberal governments, Bolivia had been stuck in a state of underdevelopment and was the poorest country in Latin America. So the government wisely made it their mission to modernize the country in order to build up the productive forces. They nationalized the natural monopolies, invested heavily in the nation's infrastructure, oversaw a stronger private sector, a growing middle class, and the beginnings of a welfare state. Now, despite bringing prosperity to Bolivia and enacting great reforms, Evo Morales has now been forced out of office, replaced by a right-wing usurper who is backed by the armed forces. Truly a travesty of justice. Now, how did the Bolivian right manage to destroy democracy? Well, they used the old tactic that was successfully used to destroy democracy in Guatemala in 1953, Brazil in 1964, and Chile in 1973. They claimed that Evo Morales, the democratically elected president of Bolivia, was a tyrant who needed to be violently removed from office. Yes, that old tactic, where they sob about being oppressed by a democratically elected government or was plotting to violently seize power themselves. Now, of course, they had their arguments. Their first complaint was that Evo Morales was running for an official third term and that the OAS had claimed that the results of the 2019 election were irregular. Let's examine these claims by starting with the term limit issue. According to Article 168 of the 2009 Bolivian Constitution, the President and Vice President can only put themselves forward for re-election once, limiting the number of terms to 2. Now, Evo Morales had been in power since 2006 and had already served 2 official terms in office before 2019. His official first term started in the year 2009 and ended in 2014. His second term started in 2014 and ended in 2019. The first 3 years of his presidency did not count because it predated the introduction of the 2009 Constitution. Now, Morales wanted to run for an official third term, so he took the question to the people in 2016, and it was voted down in a referendum by a narrow margin. However, he then took the question to the Bolivian Supreme Court, arguing that term limits barring elected officials from seeking re-election was a violation of human rights. The court ruled in Morales' favour. The head of the court, writing in the judgment, quote, "All people that were limited by the law and the Constitution are hereby able to run for office, because it is up to the Bolivian people to decide." This is a sound judgment. If the Bolivian people did not want Morales to serve an official third term, they could simply vote him out. If they wanted him to stay, then they could choose to re-elect him. Abolishing term limits in this case actually advances democracy, allowing the electorate to decide if it is time for Morales to go or not, rather than restricting him to just 2 terms. Now we come to the election count. The official results showed Evo Morales won the election by more than 10 points, which would have allowed him to avoid a runoff election. However, the OAS, the Organization of American States, Audit claimed, without evidence, that the results had been manipulated, which of course encouraged the coup plotters. Now the Center for Economic and Policy Research has released a paper entitled What Happened in Bolivia's 2019 Vote Count, the role of the OAS Electoral Observation Mission, which goes through the OAS's claims about the vote count and convincingly disputes their findings. Now, Bolivia has two vote counting systems. The first is the unofficial quick count, which allows the public to get an idea of the election result on the night, and the official count, which is the final result. Now, the quick count in this 2019 election, as it usually does, stopped after around 83.85% of the vote was counted. Now, when the quick count shut off, Evo Morales was only leading by 7.87 points. He needed to be leading by more than 10 points to avoid a runoff. Now, when the official count was released after 100% of all votes were counted, it showed that Evo Morales had won by a 10.5 point margin, which means there would be no runoff. This result was irregular according to the OAS, even though the result was completely consistent with geographical trends. The votes from rural and poorer areas of the country come in later than the votes of the cities. Those living in rural and poorer areas traditionally favour Mr. Morales by a large margin. In fact, it is the people from these areas who are now leading the fight against the Rightist dictatorship that has now been established. It should also be noted that the OAS is a vile and despicable organisation that has a history of being hostile to the left. For example, the OAS banned Cuba from joining, supporting the US and Batista's cronies because they found Marxist-Leninism incompatible with their views and values. However, when Pinochet came to power in Chile, there were no ramifications. In 1976, the OAS held their 6th summit in Chile, even though the country was basically under martial law. So the OAS is no friend of the left, or even a friend of democracy. So Evo Morales, a member of the anti-imperialist left in Latin America, would have been one of their targets. So even if they present their findings, you must view them with extreme caution and a degree of skepticism. Now, when the OAS's criticisms came in, Evo Morales decided to call another election, acknowledging that there could have been issues with the computer system. This was rejected by the opposition, who demanded that he resign. They were soon backed by the police and the military, and now Bolivia is in a terrible situation. Democracy has been destroyed, protesters who demonstrated in favour of Morales have been killed, and now an alliance of right-wing military officers and politicians rule the country. Now a question arises out of this tragedy. How can such coups be prevented in the future? How can the people stop Rightists from seizing power violently? I think the answer is clear. Leftist governments in Latin America must allow their supporters to defend themselves, to establish regulated militias that would only be mobilized in cases of national emergencies, such as a coup attempt or a military invasion. Now, I think the existence of these militias would make these Rightist officers think twice about overthrowing these leftist governments, because it won't simply be about massacring unarmed people, which the Latin American right is known for. They would have to be prepared to fight half the country. The very thought would put fear into their black hearts.